Matador, gored again brutally. Bullfighter, dubbed world's worst matador, brutally gored again after a series of shocking ring injuries. Peruvian bullfighter Andres Roca Rey, one of the most famous names in modern bullfighting, has once again suffered a horrifying injury in the ring after being violently gored by a charging bull, just 18 months after another shocking impalement incident. Now let's go beyond the surface and examine this story closely in the AI
Imagine
podcast.
being labeled by internet critics as, like, literally the worst in the world at your job. But then, simultaneously, you're being hailed by purists as the undeniable generational talent of your profession.
Right, which is wild because usually when we talk about professional sports or really any specialized career, the metrics for success are incredibly straightforward.
Exactly. Like, if you're a race car driver, success means, crossing the finish line without crashing your car into a wall.
Right, or if you're a surgeon, success means fixing the problem without making a mistake. The goal is always mastery. And mastery, it almost universally means avoiding catastrophe.
Yeah, we inherently associate high skill with a distinct lack of disaster. The absolute best in the world at anything, they make it look completely effortless.
They really do. They don't get hit, they don't stumble, and they definitely do not actively invite their own destruction.
But then you step into the deeply controversial, deeply visceral world of bullfighting, and suddenly all those normal metrics of success are turned completely upside down.
Oh, entirely. We are looking at a space where the line between absolute failure and legendary status isn't just blurry. I mean, it might actually be the exact same line.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because for you listening right now, whether you follow extreme sports or you're a student of human psychology, or even if you know absolutely nothing about bullfighting, this story is going to leave you absolutely speechless.
It really is. It is a profound paradox wrapped in an astonishing level of physical trauma.
Yeah, today's deep dive is entirely focused on the staggering, gruesome, and honestly mind-bending career of Peruvian matador Andres Roca Rey. Our mission today is to explore the sheer physical toll this man has endured.
And to unpack the bizarre paradox of his immense global popularity,
Yep.
right?
And try to understand the psychology of a person who simply refuses to quit, despite experiencing repeated, truly life-threatening trauma.
Which is, I mean, we really need to set the scene for you with his most recent incident because the footage of this event is genuinely terrifying.
Oh, it's nightmare fuel.
It is. When we review the mechanics of what happened in that ring, it defies standard physiological survival. And this takes place just 18 months after another major impalement, which we'll analyze shortly.
Right.
So Roca Rey is in the ring, and an enraged bull charges straight at him, driving its left horn deep into his upper right thigh.
And the terrifying part is that this wasn't just like a glancing blow or a scrape. The sheer force of this animal actually lifts the matador completely off the ground.
Yeah, it's just raw physics.
He is tossed into the air, and while he is suspended there, completely helpless, the bull is actively twisting that horn inside the wound.
The physics of that moment are horrifying to consider. You have the concentrated kinetic energy of a massive charging animal focused entirely on the point of a single horn.
Just devastating pressure.
Exactly, and once that horn penetrates the muscle tissue, the rotational force being applied while the victim is airborne causes just catastrophic tearing.
Wow.
He then crashed heavily onto the arena floor, and reports note that blood immediately began pouring down his leg in very significant volumes.
But the fight doesn't pause just because a guy is bleeding out in the dirt. He's incapacitated on the ground, and there is still an enraged, highly lethal animal right there, fully capable of striking again.
Right. The danger doesn't stop.
I have to imagine that executing a rescue in that environment requires someone else to immediately step into the strike zone, right? Like pulling focus away from the downed fighter.
It requires immediate, highly coordinated chaos. Several bystanders, members of his team and other personnel, they rushed directly into the ring to perform two completely distinct tasks simultaneously.
Okay, so what are they doing?
Well, one person physically attends to the fallen fighter, shielding him and assessing the immediate biological threat, but the other person has to hijack the bull's attention and redirect its momentum.
Right.
And to achieve this, they used a muleta.
The muleta being the classic red cape attached to a stick that we always see in the iconic imagery of the sport.
Right. That is the one, yeah. And understanding the function of the muleta is crucial to understanding why this specific strike happened when it did. The muleta is used specifically during the final stage of a fight.
Okay.
That final round is universally considered the most dangerous phase of the entire spectacle because of the proximity it requires.
I would think that final round is an absolute powder keg.
Yeah,
I mean, you're fundamentally trying to dominate an animal that realizes its options are running out.
exactly.
You're stripping away its space entirely to set up the end of the fight.
That is the core mechanic of the danger. In the final round, the matador is attempting to assert complete dominance right before delivering the killing blow.
Right, so they have to get close.
Incredibly close. This requires taking away its space and forcing it to follow the exact prescribed path of that mulita. There is absolutely zero margin for error.
Wow.
Both the human and the animal are pushed to their physiological and psychological limits. The matador literally has to expose his own body to secure the final strike.
So when that technique fails, even slightly,
Or the bull behaves in a way the matador hasn't predicted, the human is already deep inside the strike zone.
which is exactly what happened to Roca Rey. But, okay, here is the part of the medical report that I just cannot wrap my head around.
Yeah, the injuries are staggering.
He takes this catastrophic hit, the rescue team rushes in, and despite having a massive wound tearing through his leg, he actually struggled back to his feet before being rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery.
Unbelievable adrenaline.
And we found out later from the medical reports that the bull's horn ripped open a 35-centimeter wound in his leg. I mean, that is nearly 14 inches of torn muscle and tissue.
What's fascinating here is Dr. Mulet's assessment of the sheer medical luck involved. Yeah. Dr. Mulet, the surgeon who treated him, reported that the horn narrowly missed the major blood vessels in the leg. It actually, it grazed the vein and the artery over a distance of 10 to 15 centimeters.
Oh, my God. I really want you, the listener, to visualize this. 10 to 15 centimeters is about 4 to 6 inches. That means this jagged horn was rubbing directly against his major artery, tearing through his leg for half a foot, and somehow didn't puncture the vessel itself.
It's miraculous.
It's like driving a car along a crumbling cliff edge at top speed for miles, your tires slipping on the loose gravel the entire way, and somehow you just never fall off. The margin between a hospital stay and bleeding to death right there in the dirt was literally microscopic.
The surgical team explicitly stated he was incredibly fortunate to survive without permanent, devastating damage to his leg. I mean, the structural integrity of his vascular system barely held on.
I can't even imagine.
The tension forces alone, just from a horn tearing muscle mere millimeters away from an artery, can often be enough to rupture the vessel wall.
You'd think a near miss with a severed artery would prompt an immediate permanent retirement. Like you survive that, you buy a lottery ticket, and you find a much safer career.
You would think so.
But looking at his medical history, cheating death isn't a wake-up call for Andres Roca Rey. It's basically, a Tuesday routine.
Right. This latest hospital visit is not an isolated anomaly in the slightest. It is merely the newest chapter in an unbelievably long, intensely painful history of severe trauma.
That's a long list.
If we methodically rewind the timeline of his career, we see a catalog of physical carnage that pushes the boundaries of human endurance.
Let's actually look at the mechanics of that history. Because just 18 months prior to this recent 35-centimeter wound, he suffered another horrifying incident where he was gruesomely gored by a 3,000-pound bull.
Yeah, the 3,000 pounds.
A Honda Civic weighs roughly 3,000 pounds.
Yeah.
How does the human skeletal structure even survive an impact from something with that much mass moving at speed?
It really comes down to how the kinetic energy is transferred and, the sheer chaotic unpredictability of the arena.
Okay, how so?
In that specific incident, this 3,000-pound animal impaled him in the gluteus and flung him through the air like a rag doll. The blunt force trauma combined with the piercing injury is devastating.
Just brutal.
The human pelvis and spine are not designed to absorb a localized impact from 1.5 tons of moving mass. Survival often relies on the impact being a glancing blow rather than a direct, squared-up collision.
So he just got lucky again?
Sort of. The horns penetrate, but the animal's forward momentum is often carrying it past the matador, which flings the human rather than crushing them outright.
But he has been crushed outright, too.
Yeah.
I mean, a year before that incident, he was pinned against the heavy wooden arena barriers by a 1,000-pound bull.
Right. And that compression incident resulted in what were described at the time as some of the worst injuries of his entire career.
Oh, wow.
He suffered severe trauma to his neck, his face, his right thigh, and his left knee, all simultaneously.
All at once.
Yeah. When a human body is trapped between an immovable object like a wooden barrier and a half-ton animal, the compression forces on the skeletal system and internal organs are immense. The fact that his rib cage and spine were not permanently compromised is just astounding.
The notes from 2017 are just as grim. Another bull left a literal 4-inch hole in his inner thigh. And then there is the laundry list of other trauma sprinkled throughout his career.
It's extensive.
We're talking about being knocked completely unconscious in the ring. He has suffered documented memory loss from severe concussions. He's been gored in the groin, gored in the buttocks.
Shattered cheekbone, too.
Yeah, his cheekbone was shattered. He even lost 2 teeth after literally being stabbed in the mouth by a bull's horn.
It is a relentless, compounding accumulation of physical destruction. Every single time he steps into the ring, he is carrying the structural weaknesses, the scar tissue, and the neurological echo of every previous concussion and goring.
That is heavy.
And it's this exact bloody history that brings us back to the paradox we established at the start of our deep dive.
Right, the internet critics. Early in his career, an incredibly damaging statistic began circulating online that really shaped his reputation.
The early gorings.
Exactly. Roca Rey was reportedly gored 5 times in his very first 5 fights. Now, if I hire a plumber and he completely floods my house on his first 5 jobs, he is a terrible plumber.
That's a fair point.
Right. If you are stepping into a ring and your primary job is to control the animal and not get gored, and you get gored every single time you walk out there early in your career, doesn't that fundamentally mean your technique is flawed?
It seems like it.
I can see exactly why the internet labeled him the world's worst matador. Objectively, if you're getting stabbed in the mouth and thrown like a rag doll repeatedly, it stands to reason you're simply bad at the mechanical execution of the job.
I mean, from the perspective of an outsider looking purely at the logical metrics of self-preservation, it makes perfect sense to label him the worst.
Right, because he's failing the basic objective.
Exactly. If the overarching goal of any physical pursuit is not getting hit, he was failing spectacularly. However, within the deeply traditional insular world of bullfighting, the valuation of skill is far more complex than simple avoidance of injury.
Okay, explain that complexity to me, because taking a horn to the face doesn't intuitively seem like an expression of high art.
Well, in this specific arena, a willingness to face down brutal injury, to stand your ground even when your technique fails, to expose yourself to absolute danger without flinching or retreating, is not viewed as a lack of skill by the traditionalists.
So getting hit is almost respected.
For the purists, it is seen as the ultimate expression of commitment to the craft. The vulnerability is an intrinsic part of the performance. The fact that he was gored 5 times, but made the conscious psychological choice to keep walking back into the ring for a 6th, 7th, and 8th time, forged a narrative of unbreakable will.
I see.
That reckless disregard for his own safety, his refusal to yield to the basic human instinct of self-preservation, is the exact reason he has achieved this almost godlike status among his fans.
So the very thing that made internet trolls mock him as a failure is the exact same thing that has made him the undisputed king of the box office. We have critics who actually cover this sport, making comparisons that are frankly hard to believe. Antonio Lorca, a prominent bullfighting critic, recently described Roca Rey as one of the sport's absolute biggest icons.
Yeah, Lorca went so far as to compare Roca Rey's popularity, his cultural footprint, and his acclaim to global football legends. He specifically cited Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo.
Calling someone the Messi of the bullfighting world is a massive statement. I mean, it implies not just skill, but an undeniable magnetic draw that transcends the sport itself.
Lorca noted that absolutely no one else currently operating in the sport has the acclaim that he does. And more importantly, from an economic standpoint, no one else can fill bull rings wherever they fight quite like Roca Rey.
Selling out everywhere.
Everywhere. He is a massive, unparalleled draw, a singular economic engine for the arenas he visits.
If we use a different sports analogy to capture his specific appeal, he is basically the Rocky Balboa of the bull ring.
That's actually a great comparison.
Right. He's this figure who literally blocks punches with his face, absorbs a truly terrifying, almost inhuman amount of damage, but because he just keeps standing back up, he manages to pack the stadium and win the crowd every single time. It's the spectacle of sheer human endurance over the spectacle of flawless, untouched technique.
The audience isn't just paying for the guarantee of a flawless, bloodless routine. They are paying to see a man who they know intimately is willing to bleed for the spectacle.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to acknowledge that this immense popularity does not exist in a vacuum. Andres Roca Rey sits squarely at the center of a very tense, very loud cultural intersection.
Very loud.
He's a deeply divisive figure on a global scale.
And we need to be incredibly clear here for you listening, because this is where the story shifts from a brutal sports narrative into a major cultural clash. The sport of bullfighting itself is engulfed in an ongoing, highly charged global controversy.
Right.
There is a massive, highly organized movement of animal rights groups that vehemently and continuously condemn the entire practice.
Yes, and these organizations view the spectacle fundamentally not as an expression of art, courage, or historical tradition, but purely as a display of cruelty and unnecessary suffering inflicted upon the animal.
Exactly.
They argue that in a modern society, entertainment derived from the death of an animal is ethically indefensible.
And to be completely clear, our goal on this deep dive is not to take a side, validate either argument, or tell you how you should feel about the ethics of the arena. We are simply examining the reality of the landscape he operates in.
It's a polarized environment.
You have a massive collision of irreconcilable viewpoints. On one side, you have animal rights organizations staging protests, running international campaigns to ban the sport entirely, and pointing to figures like Roca Rey as the high-profile participants in a deeply condemned, bloody tradition.
Yes.
On the exact opposite side, you have tens of thousands of dedicated supporters packing into the stadiums, viewing him as a master of a historic, courageous art form that honors both the animal and the matador.
He is the ultimate flashpoint for this cultural divide. Because he is the most famous, the most successful, and the biggest draw in the sport, he draws the most intense fire from opponents,
Naturally.
while simultaneously serving as the high-profile face and perceived savior of a tradition that faces intense, organized condemnation. He cannot physically step into the ring without dragging all of that immense cultural weight and scrutiny with him.
The psychological pressure of that is wild to consider. The immediate physical threat from a 3,000-pound bull in the ring is almost matched by the abstract cultural pressure waiting outside of it.
The weight on his shoulders is immense.
Yet, despite the protests, despite the internet mocking his early career, and most importantly, despite a medical chart that reads like a horror novel, shattered cheekbones, memory loss, gaping leg lacerations, he absolutely refuses to walk away.
It presents an incredible psychological puzzle regarding human nature. The biological survival instinct is arguably our most powerful inherent trait. When we touch a hot stove, the nervous system ensures we pull our hand away and the brain learns never to touch it again. When a human being is crushed against a wall by a half-ton animal or tossed into the air by a horn, the biological imperative is to flee the source of that trauma and never, under any circumstances, return.
Just run away.
Exactly. But Roca Rey's future, even while recovering from this latest 35-centimeter wound, seems to completely bypass that basic human programming.
We are nearing the end of this incredible journey into one of the most dangerous professions on Earth. We started with a man bleeding in the dirt from a 35-centimeter wound, saved by the distraction of a red Malenta.
Yeah.
We traced a career defined by shattered bones, terrifying run-ins with 3,000-pound animals, and the physical reality of getting stabbed in the mouth. We've explored the bizarre juxtaposition of a man being called the world's worst matador online, while simultaneously being hailed as the Lionel Messi of his field, filling arenas worldwide.
As we look at his current status, actively recovering from yet another gruesome, near-fatal goring, the medical reality and basic logic might suggest an honorable retirement.
You would think so.
But history dictates something entirely different. If his past behavior is any reliable indicator, Andres Roca Rey is likely not ready to stop stepping into that ring. The trauma, the danger, and the damage, it seems they are a feature of his career, not a bug.
So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive talking about how we measure success and failure in almost every other field. How usually the person who avoids the crash, who operates with clean perfection, is the champion.
Right.
But in this specific bloody corner of the world, absorbing the crash and surviving the destruction is what actually built the legend. And it leaves me with this one final, really provocative thought for you to chew on after we sign off.
Let's hear it.
When tens of thousands of people buy tickets and pack into a massive arena to watch the Messi of bullfighting, a man who is globally famous, not just for his skill, but precisely because of his horrifying near-fatal injuries, are they really coming to witness his mastery of the sport?
That's the real question.
Are they coming to see flawless technique and a clean victory? Or is the dark, uncomfortable truth that they are actually showing up to witness his vulnerability? Are they captivated not by his invincibility, but by the very real, very present possibility of his absolute destruction? It
Wow.
really makes you wonder who is actually pulling the strings in that arena, the matador, the bull, or the crowd demanding the spectacle.
It is a haunting question about human nature, the psychology of crowds, and what we truly value as an audience when the stakes are quite literally life and death.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the incredible, contradictory stories you encounter out there, and we'll catch you next time.
Okay, one question for you. How did Andres Roca Rey survive yet another terrifying bull attack, and why does he continue risking his life in one of the world's most dangerous and controversial sports despite repeated brutal injuries? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.